Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
Round one brings progress, but there's still a lot of wood to chop. Welcome to the Monday edition, as all-night negotiations between the U.S. and Iran bring major progress according to both sides, including the creation of a deconfliction line to keep the Strait open. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. Kailey, President Trump just now posting to Truth Social seconds ago that Iran will agree to have major weapons inspections.
Yeah, he says that is to ensure what he's calling, quote, nuclear honesty long into the future. Although this will raise questions once again as to how exactly this agreement that is being negotiated is going to differ from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action agreement from the Obama administration, the 2015 deal that, of course, Trump said was a bad deal and took the United States out of. And,
of course, involved weapons inspectors. That's something that we've been waiting to hear more about, including the highly enriched uranium, so many of the other sensitive topics, including Israel's war with Lebanon, or we should more likely say Hezbollah. All these will need to be resolved within 60 days for there to be something we can actually call a deal.
Yeah, of course, in the intermediate 60 days, not only will these negotiations toward a deal be happening, but Iran is also going to be free to sell oil. We've officially waived the sanctions, including in this waiver provisions. The U.S. could potentially be purchasing Iranian energy products, or at least it would be allowed. So already you are starting to see some unlocking of economic incentives for Iran in this process. The
optics are sensitive there, of course, but they are bringing down oil prices. We're down 2-3% on WTI and Brent. Kailey, the stock market isn't too sure what it wants to do.
Yeah, it's down mostly today, but let's get the details now as we turn to Matt Piper up in New York with a check on the markets. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Joe and Kailey, thank you so much. We check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. Traders are driving stocks down from the brink of all-time highs. Geopolitical developments are likely to remain a key source of volatility in the near term. The S&P right now is down 0.3%. The Dow is up 0.4%, or 190 points. The Nasdaq is down more than 1%, down 304 points right now. The 2-year yield is at 4.22. The 10-year is at 4.50. We've learned the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz is running at the fastest pace since the Iran war began. That is despite Tehran stating that the waterway is shut. Tanker tracking data, seen by Bloomberg, show that tankers hauling about 20 million barrels of crude were observed passing through the waterway on Friday, Saturday, and yesterday. That has oil looking like this: Brent at $77 a barrel, WTI at $74 a barrel. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is at 1218.77. Stocks we're watching: Intel. Shares of the tech giant right now are up 4.7%. The stock also rallied at the end of last week after President Trump announced that Apple agreed to work with it to design and build chips in the U.S. Apple stock right now is up 0.6%, trading around $300. Lucid shares are down nearly 5%. It comes with word that Lucid is cutting about 18% of its staff as part of a cost-cutting plan due to wavering demand for its EVs. It expects to incur about $32 million in cash charges related to the reduction. That, it says, will save about $158 million a year going forward. Just in February, it cut 12% of its global workforce, and Lucid had tumbled 49% this year through Thursday's close. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Matt Piper, and that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Joe and Kailey.
All right, Matt, thank you very much. Clearly, the oil market is reflecting more oil flows coming out of the Strait of Hormuz. Over the weekend, we were actually back near levels we saw prior to Operation Epic Fury beginning. Some 20 million barrels boarded on tankers were able to leave the Strait over the weekend, and of course, ensuring continued clarity of passage through the Strait of Hormuz is part of what was supposed to be achieved over the weekend in Switzerland. It was a marathon negotiation. Round one between the U.S. and Iran lasted some 18 hours in Switzerland, where, of course, the Vice President, J.D. Vance, was dispatched to lead the U.S. team. And he echoed what we just heard from President Trump on Truth Social, the idea that Iran will agree to have major weapons inspections to ensure what Trump is calling nuclear honesty. Here's how J.D. Vance characterized it.
Yesterday was a very, very good day. We made a lot of good progress. We did exactly what we wanted to do. We wanted to build a mechanism for keeping the Strait of Hormuz open. It is open. The Iranians have agreed to invite IAEA inspectors back into their country. That is a major milestone for the American people.
A major milestone that the president is echoing. Tyler Kendall is covering all of this for us back at the White House, having traveled to the G7 with President Trump. He was at Camp David over the weekend. Tyler, it's great to see you back on the North Lawn of the White House. He was spending a lot of time on Truth Social. In fact, even threatened to start bombing Iran while the negotiations were underway. He was talking about the reflecting pool here in Washington. Have we heard from him, his reaction to what came from this first day of talks?
Joe, not yet, though we likely will hear from the president later today with some events on the schedule. The thing about where the talks stand now is that the U.S. is making very clear that this progress was made, but also that there's still a lot of work to do. You heard the vice president in his own words say that essentially this weekend was geared towards building the foundation for the house to be built, but the house hasn't been built quite yet. Now, this White House can tout a few different tangibles that resulted from the negotiations in Switzerland, including that we got essentially what they are saying is this basis for the technical talks to continue. There was this mechanism set up to monitor communication around the Strait of Hormuz. As you mentioned, the deconfliction mechanism that is essentially to extend the ceasefire to Lebanon after Vice President J.D. Vance himself confirmed that Iran had threatened to walk out of the talks over this issue. And then importantly, the vice president did announce that Iran has agreed to allow inspectors into its nuclear sites. President Trump just posted about it moments ago. But at this point, the access and the scope that those inspectors will be allowed to have is one of the big questions here. Moving forward, though, Joe and Kailey, we have two important meetings tomorrow that we're going to be keeping our eyes on. One is that Iranian state media has confirmed that Iran's president is set to travel to Pakistan, of course, a key mediator in this, but we're also expecting the key Iranian negotiators, including the foreign minister and the speaker of the parliament, to go to Oman. And that's very interesting here because Oman really hasn't been a party when it comes to the mediation that's been happening. That's really been focused on Qatar and Pakistan, but Oman, of course, plays a very critical role when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. And we've heard Iran float this idea that there could be some sort of agreement after this 60-day extension of the ceasefire where we would see fees imposed, and that would be in tangent with Oman. So that's going to be something to watch very closely because over the weekend we heard President Trump warn in an interview that he has told Iran directly there should be no fees imposed or we could see another escalation when it comes to military strikes by the U.S.
Well, and of course, Tyler, at the G7, you had the chance to question the president about the suggestion Iran could be charging fees. You also asked him how immediately Iran was going to be getting relief when it comes to its ability to sell oil onto the market. And we're seeing those sanctions waivers as of today.
Right, just moments after the vice president gave his news conference, we got this confirmation from the Treasury that they are temporarily waiving, issuing this waiver to allow Iranian crude to market for the next 60 days. So that will align, of course, with this extension of the ceasefire. And then we'll have to see where it goes from there. We're watching very closely how these flows ultimately tick up, while, of course, well below pre-war levels. CENTCOM did confirm on Saturday that so far 55 ships that day carrying 17 million barrels of oil were able to successfully transit the Strait. And then, Joe and Kailey, another interesting stat just to put on your radar and that we're going to probably start to see a lot more of is that data analyzed by Bloomberg News shows that 4 empty LNG tankers linked to Qatar are currently making their way through the Strait. And that is important because this is the largest number of empty LNG tankers that we've seen, but it is an indication that many of these Middle East partners are trying to get ready to ramp up their exports as the Strait becomes more fully open. But again, the threat that Iran could close it still remains after we heard negotiators saying that they were going to walk away from the talks and close it after President Trump's threats regarding Hezbollah and Israel.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall live at the White House. Thank you so much. And of course, that's one of the major questions we were having in conversation last week, Joe, was the idea that, yeah, maybe all of the ships that have been stuck, unable to transit the Strait to get out, that's one thing for them to get out. It's another for empty vessels to be brave enough to come back in and load up once more.
Especially with an insurance policy and a crew that's willing to do this. That's a big ask. And it brings us back to why so many suggested that just reopening the Strait would not bring oil flows back to where they were. Goldman Sachs last week estimating that we might get back to about 70% of pre-war levels before some time goes by.
Yeah, and of course, opening the Strait had to become one of the objectives of the end game of this conflict. The original objective that the United States outlined, of course, was in part addressing Iran's nuclear program. And that work is the one just now beginning, as Tyler was talking about. The president and vice president now saying Iran is going to be letting weapons inspectors back into the country from the IAEA. So on that note, we turn now to Heather Conley, who is back with us of the American Enterprise Institute, where she's a non-resident senior fellow. She's also former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of European and Eurasia Affairs in the George W. Bush administration. Heather, welcome back to Bloomberg.
Thank you.
Good to see you. If we could just reflect on the most recent development, it is a True Social post from the president who echoed J.D. Vance in saying Iran will agree to have major weapons inspections in order to ensure nuclear honesty. Sounds familiar. Sounds like 2015, does it not?
It does. Congratulations, you're back to the JCPOA. Wow. And I think we have to take this in very measured steps. First and foremost, it will be great to get the IAEA back into Iran to see exactly what the state of play is. But I think we have to be extremely cautious. The Iranian regime is not going to allow the transparency that we're going to desire. Even when the IAEA was allowed in, we know that they were, hiding their enriched uranium in some of their nuclear facilities. So I think we have to be cautious. This is a good step. Let's get in there. But this is not going to be what we insist on, a really robust, transparent regime to understand what they've been doing.
Well, talk to us about the difference between being on the ground and being able to watch from space. The president likes to talk about the cameras. We have cameras, the satellites he's talking about, that are so powerful you can count the dimples on a golf ball, is what we are told. Why do we need people on the ground to find these things?
Because, Joe, a lot of what Iran did was underground. The storage of their missiles, their drones, their nuclear centrifuges. And that's, recall the president always talks about nuclear dust, that in that, the 12-day war last year, it was to those bunker busters to crush and annihilate. We don't know what has been destroyed or entombed. And so you really do need the physicality of inspectors going in, and it could be the dirt removal. It's going to be extremely dangerous, extremely intrusive, and that's what, I caution that allowing IAEA inspectors into a country right now where the regime is cracking down on everybody, it's a dangerous position to be in.
Wow. Well, and on your point on dirt removal, the president has suggested a number of times that it's only the U.S. and China that have the capability and equipment required to actually go in and get the quote-unquote nuclear dust. So we can't even guarantee that the IAEA is going to be able to easily get sight on that.
Absolutely. And you're hearing through the initial phases of some of the negotiations before they made it to Switzerland about doing this, in situ, in presence. They don't know what is there. And we honestly don't know if some of the HEU was not removed from those locations. I mean, with full respect, the satellites are exceptional. Yeah. We can see a lot, but it's not perfect.
It's not being there.
You need to be there and be there persistently. I think that's the most important part.
Talk to us about the importance of this deconfliction line, or deconfliction cell, as it's being referred to avoid incidents and miscommunication, to keep the Strait open. We've successfully used similar technology with the Soviets, now again with Russia. Is this maybe the best thing to come out of this session?
Well, I think the best thing to come out of the session was actually they're starting to break down structurally these working groups to get experts working in these different things. At this point, we need to get this out of a vice presidential level negotiation. This one image of Vice President Vance on his laptop, like he was doing this himself. I'm like, whoa. Let's put the experts on these very specific technical issues. I mean, we're all trying to figure out what in situ removal looks like. Yeah. You need those experts in there. But this deconfliction, I mean, Joe, you're right. I mean, we always want adversaries to have communication lines, so if something happens, we don't quickly escalate or misinterpret something. Sure. Always important. But I find it so difficult. Those original sort of hotlines were being used quietly, privately. We have megaphone hotlines in the form of social media, and that's what got us in this crossfire over the weekend. And that's the discipline that everybody needs to show. We have incredible amounts of work to do in 60 days. Yeah. You need to get down to work, get this as detailed as possible. But meanwhile, Iran's being paid to open up the Strait, to put pressure on Lebanon. We're really not getting to the nuclear part. So they're being rewarded without really touching the nuclear part, other than letting IAEA inspectors in, and that's what should have been happening, for years.
Well, it's important that you phrase it that way, Heather, because we've been told repeatedly by defenders of what the president is trying to do with this interim deal, including Republican senators on the Hill, that this is a pay-for-performance plan, that Iran doesn't get anything unless they take a specific action. But you're suggesting that, well, the performance is still lacking. The payments have already begun.
Absolutely. I mean, Treasury just solicited that they're going to get revenue from the sanctions. That's why the Strait will remain open. We need the energy prices to continue to be low. They need to get the relief and the financial relief, and of course, the Gulf countries also need to get those exports. No, we're paying for maintaining an energy price that can be, reflective here politically, but we're paying them. And the more Iran places pressure on the Strait or on Lebanon, which corners Israel in such an untenable position. They're controlling the narrative right now. This is their negotiation, the Strait and Lebanon. I feel like the second part of the negotiation gets to what we need, focused on the nuclear, but again, nothing on proxies, nothing on ballistic missiles. We need to get that back into the negotiation channel.
Do we need to keep this full military force in place for at least the next 60 days to maintain leverage?
Joe, you're absolutely right. And this is the other sort of question we're not. I mean, the cost of this pretty significant military presence is going to have to stay. I think they have to stay in the next 60 days to ensure some compliance.
What kind of signal would that send if we sent a carrier strike group somewhere else, home or somewhere else in the world?
It would signal to the Iranians this is over, and they can continue to leverage their proxy networks, put pressure on the region. The problem is we cannot sustain this posture. We don't know the exact figure that the Pentagon is spending per day on this, but we do know that the budgets are tough, trainings are being rescheduled. I mean, this has been an unfunded, unbudgeted military operation, and this is where the reckoning will come into the costs of this 4-month conflict. The military costs, the economic costs, and sometimes when you alleviate the pressure, those costs really come to being, and a lot of folks are going to have to decide, was this worth it? I think they're going to question mark, did we really get the results we needed?
Well, and there's also opportunity costs
100%.
To consider, including where the U.S. is directing its attention. It is Iran and the Middle East that have taken up a lot of oxygen versus, say, Ukraine and the ongoing war with Russia. The president did suggest at the G7 last week that he wants to shift his focus to ending the war between Russia and Ukraine. And I wonder, Heather, in our final minute, if you think that may spell a better meeting this time around for the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte as he comes to meet with Trump on Wednesday in Washington.
All eyes. Right now, I mean, the president's anger is against our European NATO allies. This incredible spat between Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and the president. This is where, are you attacking our allies, or are we attacking the mutual problem? But I will say on a positive note, in our last few seconds here, the president did seem to be receptive to the Europeans saying, hey, I think the Ukrainians are starting to turn the corner here. Let's get on the winning side. And he seemed to be more open to that. So I'm going to hope for the positive. But I am worried about this July 7th, 8th NATO summit, particularly Secretary Hegseth's comments last week in Europe. Don't attack our allies. Attack the problem together.
Interesting how the president wants to be aligned with a winner, though, in this case, right? You wonder if the more advance Ukraine can make here, the more pro-Ukrainian Donald Trump may be.
Well, they're making some great headway in Crimea. They are really affecting the Russian economy, but this is going to get worse before it gets better. But we like where it's going right now.
Well, always so much to talk about with Heather Conley. Thank you so much, as always, Heather. American Enterprise Institute with us live in Washington after round 1 of talks between the U.S. and Iran. We've got a lot more to follow on Balance of Power. We're going to spend some time later this hour with Frank Luntz, taking the pulse of the American voter on all of this. Straight ahead on Bloomberg.
It's 1:21 on Wall Street. I'm Matt Piper. We check the markets all day long for you here at Bloomberg. There is a slide in several tech giants overshadowing optimism about progress in peace talks between the U.S. and Iran. That has stocks mixed still. The S&P right now is down 0.3%. The Dow is up 0.3. The Nasdaq is down more than 1%, or less than 304 points. Oil, Brent is at $77 a barrel. WTI is at $74 a barrel. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is at $12.1872. As for stocks we're watching, SpaceX all day. Shares are slipping for a third straight day after the company said it is selling investment-grade bonds for the first time to fund its AI ambitions. SpaceX right now down 10%, 10.8%, I should say. We also just learned that it has inked a multi-billion-dollar agreement to provide computing resources to AI startup Reflection AI. Reflection will pay SpaceX's AI division $150 million a month starting next month through the year 2029. And you think it's hot here? A heat wave is forecast to strengthen in Western Europe, with record-breaking temps expected in France, the UK, Spain, and Germany of above 100 degrees. It has already caused a surge in cooling demand that has driven up power prices over there. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Matt Piper, and that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Joe and Kailey.
All right, Matt. Thank you very much. I'm Kailey Leinz alongside Joe Mathieu here in Washington, where, of course, we spend a lot of our time talking about dysfunction in the United States government. We know that things don't always move smoothly. There's plenty of strife between the various parties in power, even when the same party is in power here in Washington, as is the case now. But one thing we can say is we don't have a leadership change as frequently as they have it in the UK. Our system, obviously, is different. These are two different kinds of democracies. And yet the United Kingdom is on the cusp of getting its 7th prime minister in a decade since Brexit, as the current prime minister, Keir Starmer, announces his plans to resign, his Labour Party obviously having suffered in recent special elections, pressured by low polling figures. The momentum was building, and perhaps his fate was sealed when Andy Burnham, the mayor of Manchester, won a seat in Parliament last week, setting him up to, of course, be the next prime minister in the UK. But here is Keir Starmer recognizing what an ally close to him called the political realities as he reflected on the situation in his government.
The question my party is asking now is whether I am best placed to lead us into the next general election. That is why I will resign as leader of the Labour Party.
Indeed, setting us up for another interesting process here, although Kailey already mentioned the name that matters, and that's Andy Burnham, said to be prepared to succeed Keir Starmer here. It's just a matter of the coronation. Therese Raphael, Bloomberg editorial board member, joins us now, knowing that Keir Starmer lasted longer than a head of lettuce. Therese, but it's obviously a situation that has a lot of Americans wondering how this can happen so quickly. In this case, did this begin with Jeffrey Epstein and the fallout surrounding that scandal, or was this more to do with the economy in the UK?
I think it began pretty soon after that momentous 2024 election in which Labour replaced the Tory government and Keir Starmer became prime minister, promising to sort of end the chaos of the last 5 years, but certainly almost the last 14 years, where we saw successive changes of government, economic troubles, and he promised stability, he promised competence in government. And almost immediately, there were doubts that he would be able to deliver it. There were policy reversals. The polls began to reflect a lot of problems with the way he communicated. One contact of mine who's makes no bones about his conservative point of view says, he only really had one adenoidal register, and I think that kind of timber, the way he communicated. Even his resignation speech, I think people just grew a little bit tired of that. But yes, the economy did have an impact, and the Peter Mandelson firing and his involvement in Jeffrey Epstein had an impact. There were so many issues that just piled up over the last 2 years. But ultimately, what I think made the biggest difference is that Labour MPs, began to really doubt that they would be holding their seats in the next election. And Keir Starmer couldn't survive that. The popularity of the Reform UK, of Nigel Farage's party, had really soared, and he needed to go if Labour was going to have a chance to hold on at the next election.
Well, of course, there will be the question of governing between now and the next election, Therese. So when we consider Andy Burnham's path here, knowing that it seems all but guaranteed he will become the next prime minister, potentially as soon as mid next month, what decisions is he going to have to make immediately as he considers his own cabinet and the people that will surround him, including Chancellor of the Exchequer, for example?
Yeah, huge decisions. There are a lot of names that have been thrown out for Chancellor of the Exchequer, including Ed Miliband, who is very unpopular with the union. So the conversations that are going on now behind the scenes will be between Andy Burnham and union leaders and labor heavyweights. And the signal that he sends to the markets, especially, is going to be enormously important. And we've heard him very quickly reverse that the gaffe where he said, Britain is too in hoc to the bond markets, and quickly got slapped down for that some months ago. So he'll have to make that decision, but also foreign policy. He's not experienced in foreign policy the way, and will not have credibility on that front the way Keir Starmer does. Who will he appoint as foreign secretary? Will he publish the defense investment plan, which governs Britain's entire defense strategy and spending, and has been long delayed, and will determine how Britain meets its NATO targets and its credibility among its NATO allies on defense and security issues. So they're big, heavyweight issues. It's a long way from Manchester to London, even if it's just, a very short train ride.
No doubt. What happens to Keir Starmer after this? You could put a small orchestra together with all the former prime ministers of the past 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, he said he wanted to focus on being a good husband and dad. He's, is still fairly young. You can't really, you wouldn't, imagine that he would want to be on the sidelines for too long. There have been some suggestions that he would make a very good foreign secretary, allowing Andy Burnham to focus on the domestic policy. But that would require them to really, to put aside a lot of personal animosity. Starmer had backed Burnham. I think it was in 2015 when he ran for Labour leader. Burnham's very belatedly backed Starmer in 2020. There's no love lost between the two. But, if you're looking for someone to front Britain's, Britain to the world, you could do worse than Keir Starmer. I think that's one area where the public have given him quite a bit of credit on. But there are other candidates too. Yvette Cooper's in the job. So who knows? But I think Starmer will probably want to take a break to consider things for a while. But I wouldn't be surprised if he's back in some capacity.
All right, Therese, thank you so much. Therese Raphael, member of the Bloomberg editorial board. We appreciate it as we consider the turnover once again in the UK government. But as Therese talks about this notion that it wasn't even just the tide shifting against Keir Starmer, but his Labour Party after their sweep to power in 2024, it raises questions about whether this is just, once again, a year that is working against incumbency. And you certainly see echoes of that anti-incumbent behavior here in the United States, as well as we careen toward our own midterm elections. And it's on that note that we welcome now back to our Washington, D.C. studio, Frank Luntz, the pollster and CEO of FIL Inc., who is with us now on Bloomberg TV and radio. Frank, it's good to see you.
Good to see you. I was just in London last week.
Were you?
I met with Tony Blair, who's been the most successful labor leader of the last 50 years. Mm-hmm. And the fact is, when labor tacks towards the center, when it takes common sense approaches, policies, and doesn't try to govern with an ideological bent, labor wins. Mm-hmm. And when labor goes ideological, they lose. And that's something that the people who are still in power now need to consider. Common sense, solutions, results, get things done, that wins. Ideological politics, even in the UK, and we're going to see some of that here in America, that loses.
Well, it's easy to connect the dots to the U.S. on this, right? We're going to see the Senate today, Frank, vote and likely pass a bipartisan housing bill that every lawmaker who comes on this program is going to talk about because it's the one thing they could collaborate on. After this, is the store closed?
Let's see what happens in Iran. But we don't even know whether we can trust the agreement, whether we trust what we're seeing. The problem is deeper than just the politicians. The problem is that the American people have lost faith, trust, and confidence in their leadership. not just in the political leadership, but the leadership of lawyers, doctors, professionals, business people. We are suffering through a crisis of confidence in the people in charge. And until people step up and say, enough, I hear you, I get it, and let's start bringing in accountability, responsibility. Until that happens, this is going to get deeper and deeper.
Well, you talk about the deal with Iran, and it's unclear whether or not we can trust it. Does the American electorate want to see an end to this conflict that the vast majority of them didn't want started in the first place? I just wonder, for all of the talking about how this may or may not be an ultimately strategically satisfactory deal for the United States here in Washington, if everyday people are saying, no, we're glad it's over, it doesn't matter what the end game ultimately was.
So here's the problem. They want it over. That you're correct. They didn't want it to start in the first place. But now they don't trust the details. They don't trust what's actually being written there. They do not want Iran to have nuclear weapons. They do not want Iran to be in control of the straits of the oil market. But they're not willing to do those things that will remove control from Iran. So now we're in this catch-22 where I don't know how you fix something that's so horrifically broken that we want services, but we don't want to pay the taxes. We want Social Security and Medicare, but we don't want to invest in the future. You can't have it both ways. And at some point, someone has to say, look, they made promises to you that they're going to break. Sorry about that, but we have to get our act together.
So does President Trump get credit for stopping the war, or is he blamed for starting it?
Oh, there you go. That's perfect. He does get blamed for starting it. They did not want this. Republicans did not want this. And he cannot keep pursuing it when the public says no. And the issue with Congress is that they keep saying, this is our responsibility. We declare war. It's our vote. And the public says, I don't trust you either. I don't want what's happening in the White House. I don't want what's happening on Capitol Hill. At some point, who do you turn to? The Supreme Court has lower approval ratings now than ever before. Yeah. The media, this institution, lower levels of trust and respect than ever before. Every institution. What the hell are we supposed to do when we look at television and we say, I don't trust me. I don't trust anyone who's speaking to me now. And I don't know how to fix it.
Wow. If you don't, who does?
I'm listening to the experts. And if you're an expert, and I use that in quotation marks, we don't trust them either.
Right.
We don't trust the scientists. We don't trust the experts in business. Bobby Kennedy is able to lead the Health and Human Services Department because he shares that same kind of skepticism to the people who got us here. The problem is who's going to get us out of here.
Well, and when we consider that, obviously this erosion in trust didn't happen overnight. Frank, this was, through repeated majorities and minorities and what have you. So it probably can't be expected to change overnight either, no matter what happens in November. But with all of this in mind, if you had to call the outcome of the midterms in November right now, where will we be? Is it a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate?
Democratic House, a tie in the Senate, which will go to the Republicans because of the vice president. But right now, Republicans are not participating. And this is what I say to every American right now, because this is important. It's not the pollsters who are going to get this wrong. If Republicans aren't voting and Democrats are, that tells me that there are going to be a couple of Democrats who get elected in the Senate who we did not see. And it's not that the polling is wrong, it's that Republicans didn't turn out. And that's why it's too close to call.
What's going to happen? I think it's Wednesday. The president goes to this steering committee lunch in the room with Republican senators. Will it feel different?
No.
Than it did last time, the time before that?
There are some of them who are angry at him.
Yeah.
For the Texas, for the endorsement that cost John Cornyn the Senate seat. And the fact is a Democrat can win in Texas. If you have low Republican turnout and the Hispanic vote, which had moved towards the GOP but is now dead center, undecided, you could even see Texas flip.
Wow.
And that was a decision that the president made. Ohio, Republican incumbent, a previous Democratic senator seeking to get his seat back. Alaska, turnout is critical. Alaska and Maine, turnout is critical in determining who wins. North Carolina, Trump bullied and just pushed Tom Tillis out. And Tillis said, enough, I don't want to do this anymore. Well, that seat's going from Republican to Democrat. So I can show you race after race where the president's involvement is more likely to lead to a Democrat than a Republican. But in the end, if he focuses on affordability, if he focuses on health care, if he gives people the confidence that they need to believe that next year will be better than this year, he'll be okay. But I don't know if he's going to do that. I don't know if his language is going to be sufficiently targeted to say to people, have faith and trust in me. Have confidence that things are going to get better. Because I'll tell you, the words that he's using right now are not effective.
Well, he, of course, though, isn't running for election. Again, it's Republicans in Congress who are up for the vote this time. So is it wise at this point in the cycle for those Republicans who are on the ballot to break from the president if he's not doing those things, or does it still serve to have close ties to him?
That is a great question, and the answer is if you break the party. If you break to save yourself, you hurt everybody else. So in the end, the Republicans will rise and fall based on what the American people think of the president. And make no mistake, Donald Trump is the most powerful political leader in my lifetime, even greater than Ronald Reagan. People are going to vote based on what they think of Donald Trump, not necessarily what they think about Congress. And it's behoven to him to communicate more effectively than he's doing right now. And if he chooses not to, if we keep hearing about inflation, I love inflation, or affordability is a hoax, if that's what we're going to hear from this White House, then Republicans are in trouble.
We got to wrap in a minute, Frank, but we woke up to news of Alan Greenspan passing today. Just emblematic of a Washington that valued institutions. And in this case, a giant of a man whose voice people did believe. You don't see that very often anymore. Is this the counter to what you're describing?
Yes, and watch when people come to pay their respects to him in the next few days. Watch how many Democrats will be there. There'll be Democrats, Republicans, political people, business people. Greenspan could bring everyone together in a single room at a single time, and that doesn't exist in Washington anymore. Alan Greenspan was more than a legend. He was a guy who his voice was so significant, so essential, and we don't have that kind of person right now.
I appreciate your being here, as always, Frank. It's great to compare notes.
Thanks.
The CEO of FIL Inc., of course, there's only one Frank Luntz. There was only one Alan Greenspan, as we remember the ways.
Greenspan's first exposure to the global financial system he would lead came playing the clarinet in a jazz band at a New Hampshire resort in 1944. Not really understanding at the time that the delegates gathered one floor below him were working through what would become the Bretton Woods Accords.
I was at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. I didn't have a clue what all of that noise around me was. And somebody said, well, there's a big convention here. And I said, oh, too bad. I didn't think about it again for 75 years.
43 years later, he'd gone from playing in the band to becoming simply the chairman, presiding over the Federal Reserve for nearly 20 years. That's the second longest tenure in history. Known for supporting the economy through what became known as the Greenspan Put that helped give the United States unprecedented prosperity through the 1990s. Alan Greenspan was the first to admit he didn't know everything. Not even he could have anticipated something never taught in economics, the possibility of negative interest rates.
How in the world did we end up with negative interest rates? Interest rates are a major component of what economists call time preference. It's the extent of discounting human beings make about values today versus values tomorrow.
But to the end, Chair Greenspan remained focused on the big questions that he found timeless, and especially on the threat posed by our looming national deficit.
The one thing that has been a very considerable surprise in recent years is the extent to which unequivocally entitlements are crowding out gross domestic savings, dollar for dollar, to get that changed is a huge political issue.
Though he has been gone from his position at the top of the Federal Reserve for over a quarter century, the hole that he leaves will continue on well into the future.
Alan Greenspan, 100 years old. The voice you just heard, of course, was that of our great colleague David Weston, the host of Bloomberg Wall Street Week, and he's with us today in Washington, D.C. It just happened to work out like this to our benefit. David, it's great to see you, and thanks for spending some time with Kailey and I on an important day like this. I was really touched by Alan Greenspan's wife, of course, Andrea Mitchell of NBC News legend, who referred to his battle with Parkinson's, which I was not aware of, and something that we should all consider the impact that must have had on his family. The giant of a man, she said. There couldn't be another Fed chair like this in this day and age.
I suspect not, because the history's different. You know, the whole situation's different.
Yeah.
But to pick up on the battle with Parkinson's, the last time I saw him was 2 or 3 years ago, actually at a big event here in D.C., the Gridiron Dinner.
Yeah.
And he was not, well, he was there in his wheelchair with Andrea, and he insisted he wanted to be at the party. So he was battling. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
Well, that speaks to Greenspan, the man, but there was Greenspan, to Joe's point, the Federal Reserve chair.
Yes.
And this notion that the Fed cannot be a Greenspan-led Fed once again, has he not, though, left a lasting mark on the institution in the notion that the Federal Reserve is always going to be there as the backstop to financial markets if necessary?
That is the Greenspan put, exactly. But beyond that, Kailey, he was the one who started the news conference when they made the announcement, and the FOMC announcement thing before that under Volcker, before they make the decision, they sort of set it out. But he really put the Federal Reserve on the front page, and it's sort of ironic. He communicated a lot. He talked a lot, and most people couldn't understand what he was saying most of the time. And I think it was intentional. He didn't want people to understand too much of what he was saying.
Needed a decoder ring. Now it's just Fed speak all day long. So, but just to add on to what Kailey asked you, everybody knows about the Greenspan put, and there was a reason why. But then it became the Bernanke put. Then it became the Powell put. Will there be a Warsh put?
Well, certainly if President Trump has his way, there will be a war.
That's for
exactly
sure.
Right. But
after what you heard last week, though?
One of the things that struck me about Alan Greenspan was, and I'm not saying that they would agree, but some of his policies were very similar to what Donald Trump would like. He basically favored loose monetary policy. That was the put, right?
That's right.
And he also was against regulation of the financial industry. He held back on that, and later on said probably he made a mistake. Because of the great financial crisis, so he sort of shared that. I mean, and Ayn Rand, he was an acolyte of Ayn Rand who really believed in that free market capitalism with a vengeance.
Well, and I wonder if we're seeing echoes of the things that he experienced or that came about at the end of his tenure, like the financial crisis because of subprime. Now we have questions around private credit, for example. He once warned of irrational exuberance. Now we're living in the age of AI, driving incredible valuations in these markets.
And one other parallel or distinction, he fought against raising rates in the 90s because he thought productivity was coming up because the internet was clicking in. And a lot of people criticized him saying, we're going to have runaway inflation. He said, no, I'm looking at the numbers. He always liked to look at the individual numbers. He said, I don't see it. And he was right in the end. There was more productivity. So that's a flip side. It could also be AI. That's something that Kevin Warsh believes in.
He has a task force for that.
Exactly. for that and a lot of other things. Yeah, that's right. But he really believed in that increased productivity through technology.
So with all of the comparisons to 2000, 1999, whatever you want to call it, I wonder what we can learn then. A hands-off approach to this emerging technology called the internet, but also concern about where the markets were heading. We're setting new all-time highs every day and have been doing so with the Strait of Hormuz closed over the past couple of weeks. This idea of irrational exuberance colliding with a laissez-faire approach to new technology would say, do what now?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a great point, Joe, but it's interesting. The laissez-faire he was criticized for, and to some extent even said he'd gone too far on, was in financial regulation, regulating the banks and monitoring the banks. You're talking about laissez-faire with respect to technology.
That's right.
And it's not clear the Fed should have much role at all. What do they know about AI, what to do about it? And so it's a different sort of problem. I think that really more is an executive branch problem rather than the central bank.
Even though the Fed will consider its economic effects, hence the task force that Kevin Warsh has put forward, including a number of others. And that gets to also the question of communication. Kevin Warsh has made it very clear that he doesn't think the Fed should overly communicate. He is unlike Alan Greenspan in that way, would you say?
Yes, absolutely. Although I'm watching that news conference, Kevin Warsh's first news conference, I thought he was very clear and very direct. I mean, he didn't shy away from the questions, and he gave direct answers. Now, it helped with the task force, as you point out, to say, we're going to get to that. We're going to think about everything. You don't have to actually make decisions. But I mean, he doesn't want to have as much communication, I think maybe particularly from the regional presidents. Yeah. He'd like to have more control over it. But he didn't show me any sort of opaqueness in what he wants to do. He seemed pretty straightforward. But the thing about Alan Greenspan, the people miss is he was not a theoretical economist. You know, he got a master's degree in economics in 1950. He got his PhD 20 years later. Because he was actually an advisor to companies. And as Fed chair, he would look at individual numbers repeatedly. He did not have a theory that he applied. He would look at the individual numbers, call up and see what's going on with the rail cars, what's going on in that part of the economy, this part of the economy. And he really did it from the bottom up.
Incredible to reflect on the legacy of Alan Greenspan, who again died today at 100 years old. David Weston, host of Bloomberg Wall Street Week. Thank you so much for the conversation. And of course, as we were just discussing, Alan Greenspan once warned of irrational exuberance in markets. Maybe we have seen some of that as of late, but it's not present today with stocks actually heading lower. So let's get a check on those markets now as we turn to Matt Piper up in New York. Matt.
And Kailey and Joe, thanks. It's 1:48 on Wall Street. I'm Matt Piper, and we do check the markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. Markets are mixed, while oil prices are edging lower on fresh optimism over progress in those U.S.-Iran negotiations. In fact, Vice President Vance just spoke moments ago saying they continue to make progress in Switzerland on technical talks. Let's go to the boards. The S&P 500 right now is down 0.3%. The Dow is up 0.3%. The Nasdaq is down 1.2% or 307 points. COMEX gold down 1% at 4,200. Oil, Brent is down 3.5%, $77 a barrel. WTI still sticking steady at $74 a barrel. Your top business stories. Iranian crude is flooding onto the global market again. Bloomberg has just learned that Iran shipped more than 30 million barrels of oil for Asia in the past week. The flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz is running at the fastest pace since the Iran war began, despite Tehran stating that the waterway was shut. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Matt Piper, and that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Joe and Kailey.
All right, Matt, thank you so much. All of that oil that is now once again able to flow out of the Middle East obviously should help, at least in some way, in bringing energy prices down and perhaps dampening the inflation that many feared would arise from a prolonged closure of the Strait of Hormuz. But there are still inflation-related energy costs to consider, especially as here at home, we consider the build out of massive data centers and the energy that they will consume, the power and the grid that they need to connect to. This is something we explored on Balance of Power last week when the chair of FERC, Laura Sweat, joined us to talk about their new proposal to hook data centers up to the grid. She said right now the grid's not ready. They're trying to change that.
The way that our electric grid is now with the generation that we have today, it is not going to work. That is why we have to be aggressive. We have to look at everything with fresh eyes and make interventionist and unprecedented action.
The National Electrical Manufacturers Association is also looking at how to address the challenge of data centers and the components that go into them to make them more energy efficient. They just released a blueprint for this earlier this month, and their president and CEO, Debra Phillips, is here with us now in our Washington, D.C. studio. Debra, welcome to Bloomberg TV and Radio. It's good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you obviously have just put forward this framework. How can NEMA essentially help to make data centers more efficient? What does it take?
Yep. So we represent the electrical equipment manufacturers. We make up about a third of every data center that's built. So it's really in our vested interest to make sure that these data centers are operating safely, as efficiently as possible. And that's really why we came together to produce this blueprint, in order to contribute to this conversation about how we're going to manage these large loads that are coming online.
Is this like Christmas morning for you guys? I wake up to another headline every day, and today was no exception. Microsoft, Chevron signed power deal for Texas data center. You've got GE Vernova attached to it. You've got Caterpillar. Everyone's rallying. Maybe there'll be another one tomorrow. Is this good news for you in that a story like this keeps data center off the grid, or is it your job to marry the two?
it's our job to marry the two. I mean, it is a great time to be in the electrical industry, not only because of what's happening in the data center space, but we're onshoring manufacturing. That every manufacturing facility, about 30% of the spend is on electrical equipment. You think about, we're also starting to power our cars through electric vehicles. So it really is the age of electrification, and so this industry is in quite the pole position to serve each of these end markets.
And how do you do that more efficiently? What needs to change?
Well, that's really what this blueprint, this data center blueprint, is all about. How do you use all of these electrical technologies in a data center application? Think about them as a whole system, build for efficiency, but also for scale and speed. And so that's what this framework does. It takes a look across all of those technologies, looks at the impact from an environmental standpoint, from an energy efficiency standpoint, and also from a safety standpoint. Data centers are using massive amounts of electricity, so we've got to, manage these voltages wisely.
I mentioned the Microsoft Chevron deal. That's a natural gas deal. You're dealing with moving electrons from any number of sources, though. And for how long will this be an all of the above as we try to look to the future of nuclear? You're still going to be pushing natural gas, oil. I don't know if coal's involved in this. Will solar become a bigger part?
Absolutely. We believe we need all sources of generation, no doubt, and for the foreseeable future, for at least the next 10 years.
Is gas at the top of that list?
I mean, gas is in there. It really, gas is in there because it's dispatchable.
Right.
You can run a data center operation 24/7 when you use natural gas. But solar, energy storage, wind, it's all part of the equation. And oftentimes you can build these renewable energy generation sources faster than traditional because of permitting delays. So, we need the entire ecosystem, I think, to deliver all of these electrons where they need to go with speed.
You also need the parts and components, and I wonder, as we're seeing build-outs of this scale, if there are any bottleneck supply chain challenges that your members are running into, and if tariffs perhaps exacerbate them in some areas.
Well, for sure, supply chain has been the top of every manufacturer's mind since the days of COVID. In the electrical system, I mean, we're focused on chips, we're focused on electrical steel, we're focused on critical minerals, and so making sure that we have ample domestic supply of those materials is key to this industry during this moment.
Fascinating. You could write a whole book about chips, I'm sure, on their own. Would the gas turbine be next in line for the most in-demand item?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about transformers, switchgear, gas turbines, and from time to time there are long lead times for those materials. But this industry is thinking about investing for the long game. Knowing what's coming in our electrical system, how do we make sure that we've got these supply chains here domestically to serve this need? For the next 10 years.
Well, you are in the middle of a storm right now. I can only imagine, looking back on this a couple of years from now, the incredible growth that you're surrounded by. Debra, thank you for joining us to talk about it. Debra Phillips, National Electrical Manufacturers Association. She's the president and CEO. Alongside Kailey Leinz, I'm Joe Mathieu. That does it for the early edition. We'll meet you back here at 5 p.m. Eastern for the late edition of Balance of Power, and you can only get it right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.